Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 681. It's been a while. Rumble. Rumble. Huh? What's going on? The surroundings shook, throwing me off completely. The feeling only grew worse as I watched the eye fade before my eyes, leaving me completely at a loss for what had just happened. Did it just run away? It truly did seem to be the case as I looked at the empty space before me. But why would it run away? It was useless. Even if it ran, I could just restart the loop. I was just about to activate the eye again and restart the loop when I stopped. Wait, something about the situation makes no sense. I recalled the sudden enlargement of the purple orb and realized that something else was at play. Clutching my burning right eye, I gave a light tap on the seabed and launched myself out from the depths of the maw. Splash! Coming out of the water, the rumbling in the distance continued. What's happening? What is going on? In the distance, not far from where I stood, were two figures, Silas and Anne. Neither appeared badly hurt. In fact, they both looked relatively fine. As the rumbling continued, Silas looked at and before suddenly fading from the spot, leaving the place. Wait! And tried to reach out for him, but by the time she realized what had happened, he had already left. In the end, her eyes fell on me as she finally took notice of me and asked, "Did you do this? Are you the one who did this?" Didn't. I was just as confused as she was. Looking up, I forced my way out of the depths of the maw and onto the outer surface of the Crimson Sea. The moment I did, my eyes locked onto the towering figure in the distance, its enormous frame sending a sharp, searing pain through my skull, and for the briefest moment my mind went completely blank. I was quick to snap out of it, but just one look was enough to make me extremely wary. That should be Xaherl's real body. It was massive and creepy in every sense of the word. There were so many eyes I couldn't begin to count them, each one bulging and twitching, embedded along its tentacles like the suction cups of an octopus. They blinked out of sync, staring in every direction, some locking onto me with a cold and human focus that made my skin crawl. But that wasn't the most important thing at the moment. Staring at the massive creature and seeing the purple orb expanding further and further in its body, as it started to squirm around, I knew that something was happening. Something big. But what in the world is happening? This fear it was experiencing, it was even more pronounced than the one I had created. Rumble. Waves formed, growing in size with each second that passed, splashing onto the maw and its surroundings. The situation is getting out of control. Seeing the current state of the beast, I was really tempted to restart the loop, but decided against it. I wanted to see exactly what was about to happen. But that proved to be quite a difficult task as the pain in my eye grew more and more prominent with each second that passed. The more time passed from the locked point, the more it demanded from the eye. I could at most resist for a few more minutes before needing to give up and restart the loop. But the pain from the eye wasn't the only thing that was making life hard for me, as I was also having an extremely tough time trying to resist the pressure that was coming from the distant monster. Despite being far, it almost felt as though I was being squeezed into the ground by just standing near it. It was terrifying. And it only grew from there as a sudden black light pierced from the insides of the beast. It was as if a pillar of pure darkness had erupted from the sky, slamming down onto the beast and swallowing it whole. The pressure that came out of the action was even more terrifying than the previous one, and I had no choice but to move further back, feeling something rise from within my chest as I covered my mouth to feel something wet brush against it. When I looked down, I saw that it was my own blood. What in the world? I looked into the distant pillar with a horrified look, staring at the surroundings that seemed to collapse under the pressure that came from the distance. I wanted to stare at the scene for a little longer, and I was really tempted to do so, but turning my head and spotting a certain ship in the distance, my heart sank. A figure appeared next to me not long after. That's my ship. I looked at Anne and then the ship. Before I knew it, Anne had caught up to me and was staring at the scene in the distance with me. While Lazarus no longer existed, his memories existed with me. I knew this was the ship and had prepared for emergencies. As towering waves like rolling mountains battered it mercilessly. Let's go. Without hesitation, Anne and I sprang into action. I leapt from crest to crest, chasing the ship through the stormy sea, and finally reached it. With a sudden jump, I landed on top of the ship and used Step of Suppression to steady it, anchoring it firmly against the relentless fury of the waves. Although the ship continued to rock around the waves, it was a lot more stable, and the people within the ship managed to recollect themselves. Lazarus and... It was also in that moment that I heard a certain voice, and when I turned my head, I saw Anne heading in our direction, his expression somewhat at ease as he looked at us. Wait, wasn't he supposed to be with those from the Goddess of Light? Why was he here? No, I can already guess the reason. Looking at him and seeing how wet he was, I quickly understood the situation as I felt a strange sense of discomfort build up in my chest. Do you know what is happening? Why is the monster acting like this? No, seeing how you two are still alive, everything went well? Staring at Anaz and seeing just how calm he appeared to be despite the situation, the sense of discomfort only grew as I felt a mix of feelings well up from deep within me. These feelings, they weren't exactly mine. I knew that. But at the same time, I had spent some time with Anaz as myself. I knew how he was before, and seeing his current change, I really felt a mix of emotions. Lazarus? Chimo. Hearing him call again, I snapped out of it and looked towards the distant beast as the pillar that surrounded its body grew larger and larger, masking its entire figure. It had gotten to the point where I could no longer see its features, and seeing the scene, I looked around before speaking. Let's get out of here. This place isn't safe anymore. You've heard him. And the others moved swiftly, hauling up the anchor and raising the sails while everyone on board fought against the storm to get the ship moving. Thankfully, with Anne's help and my own, we managed to pull the vessel a safe distance away, escaping the worst of the chaos without so much as a scratch on the hull. I didn't invest a lot of money in the ship so that it wouldn't last against some waves. And looked rather proud at the fact, and as I looked at her, I turned my attention back towards the distant pillar. I wanted to understand exactly what had happened. What was the pillar of darkness and WH? I didn't need to wait long to get my answer. As the rumbling in the distance persisted for a few more seconds, it all suddenly stopped. The waves, the rumbling, the everything stopped. The world grew silent, as though it was holding its breath. And then, the pillar started to recede, slowly shrinking into itself as a figure soon became clear for everyone to see. Me included. But the moment my eyes fell on the figure, it was as if my entire body had frozen in place, my heart and my mind stopping at the same time. Her long black hair flowed silently in the wind, framing deep obsidian eyes that seemed to hold the endless depths of the abyss itself, and an appearance so striking it felt unmatched anywhere in this world. Delilah stood right where Exahurl had once stood, her presence seeming even more terrifying than it was before as her emotionless eyes were fixed on the water beneath her. She didn't say a word. She just stood there staring in silence before closing her eyes and fading away from the spot. Like that, she left. Alongside her disappearance was Exahurl. I couldn't see any trace of the beast, and as I touched my right, it no longer felt as hot as the connection I had set up with it, and the eye was gone. That was enough to confirm it to me. Dead. Exahurl was dead. It had been killed by Delilah as she appeared from out of nowhere and completely dispatched it. I stood in silence alongside everyone around me. But in the end, a smile cracked on my lips as I found myself unable to hold back my smile. So this is the end? Delilah managed to kill it just like that? But what about her being defeated by it? That was what it told me. I guess it had mistaken the situation, or something else happened. I wasn't sure, and the others also looked just as lost as I was. However, that was of no importance. Thud. Slumping down onto the wooden deck beneath me, I took a long and deep breath. Finally, this experience was over. Exahurl was dead. I managed to collect the eye and had almost all 4 relics with me. Staring at the gray sky above me and the distant white sun, I closed my eyes and let out a long and tired breath. Finally, I could go back home. I'm fucking sick and tired of the mirror dimension. Water too. I hated the fucking water. Chapter 682. It's been a while, too. A few moments prior. Rumble. Rumble. The rumbling coming from the distance still managed to reach the remnant south, causing large waves to form around the port as the ships were capsized over and large waves shot towards the city. Stay back. Stay under the protection of the Great Barrier. Despite the situation looking grim, and aside from the initial issues, the situation was rather tame within Virilith. A massive dome raised by the emissaries of the Church of the Goddess of Light enclosed the entire city, shielding it from the towering waves crashing down and the distant suffocating pressure pressing in. This lasted quite a while before eventually stopping. And just as everyone thought that the situation was over, the rumbling resumed. This time more frantic and powerful than before. Rumble. Rumble. The pressure coming out this time was enough to give chills to everyone present. Careful. Keep the dome steady. Even the massive dome that covered the entire city started to falter. What the hell is happening over there? Do you think the Chancellor is going to be okay? Having been brought to the remnant south, the cadets were naturally all exposed to the current situation. And yet, the only thing they could do was stand behind the dome while hoping that nothing bad happened. Generally, however, everyone was quite calm. Having experienced far worse in the past, they were able to handle themselves in such a situation. However, not everyone was calm. It's there. I'm sure it's there. A pair of gray eyes remained fixed over the distance where the pressure was coming from as his fists clenched tightly. Every part of his body screamed that whatever he was looking for was right there. His instincts were telling him that. However, he wasn't sure of what he was looking for. He had asked the Chancellor to bring him with her, but in the end she still ended up rejecting his offer. And Leon couldn't blame her for that. Just a wisp of the pressure from the distance was enough to make it extremely hard for him to breathe. He couldn't imagine how bad the situation would be if he were closer. But still, a large part of Leon really wanted to be there. Look, all of a sudden Aoife pointed towards the distance. Right where an enormous black pillar pierced the sky directly. What the hell is that? I don't have a good feeling about the situation. She wasn't the only one to have noticed the pillar. It wasn't long before everyone within the city noticed the pillar as the rumbling grew even more pronounced, shaking the entire city to the core. Rumble. Screams pierced through the surroundings as a lot of people lost their footing. Thankfully Leon and the others had been ready from the start, all of them standing steady as they stared towards the distance with a grim expression. Just when they thought that the situation was about to turn for the worse, something unexpected happened. Silence. The world fell into absolute silence and everything came to a halt as if everything had frozen in time. It almost felt like the situation had never started in the first place. If not for the destruction that took place, nobody would have noticed. And then, swoosh, a figure suddenly appeared before the cadets, surprising them on the spot as some even yelped in surprise. Thankfully they appeared to be the only ones to notice her presence as she looked at the cadets to make sure that they were all present. Then as a silence started to settle around them, Aoife spoke, turning towards the Chancellor. Did you? Yes. Delilah didn't even try to deny it, staring at her hand, which was trembling slightly. I got rid of the beast. Everything was still a blur to her. She couldn't quite recall what had happened. The only thing she knew was that the moment she came into contact with the monster's body, she lost control over her body as it suddenly turned weak. She was then swallowed by the monster, bringing her to this dark place that appeared to suck the very energy out of her. The situation was rather grim, but even in such a situation Delilah didn't panic. She sat in the dark space waiting for the right opportunity to strike as she gathered all of her energy. And then, the opportunity presented itself rather quickly to her. She noticed a slight opening, a faint weakness in the monster's body, and she directly exploited it, killing it in one go with her most powerful attack. It was all over now. She was tired, extremely tired, to the point where she felt like she'd faint at any second. However, she remained standing. The last thing she could do was show weakness in front of the cadets. In their eyes, she was an invincible figure. She couldn't afford to break that image to them. But more than anything, her mind was foggy. A strange and foreign power was roaming within her body, slowly seeping into every part of it as she felt the power slowly starting to assimilate with her. Delilah understood that she was starting to undergo a change. The change brought a certain pain to her mind. But in spite of the pain, she started to remember something. A certain someone. A certain name. And her expression finally changed. He's the reason why I'm here. Splash. Water splashed against the bow of the ship as it cut through the water and navigated through the calm waters of the Crimson Sea. I stood in silence, taking in the view and quietly admiring the scene before me. This was the first time in a very long time that I felt somewhat at peace. My eye was still hurting from the relic, but it was at a manageable level. It wasn't strong enough that I couldn't ignore it. I'd be worried if that were the case. The thing I'm more spooked about is how Lazarus simply gauged the eye out like that, without even an ounce of hesitation. Granted, the situation warranted such action, but thinking back to when Lazarus plunged his hand into the eye socket and tore the eye out still sent shivers down my spine. While it isn't impossible for someone to have a new eye with the magic in this world, I still feel the action is a bit extreme. Thankfully it all worked out in the end, and I managed to collect the relic and get rid of the primordial's influence at the same time. If there was one thing that bothered me, however, it was Silas. Because I had been so preoccupied with what was happening with the primordial one and Delilah, I wasn't able to pay attention to him at all, and as a result he managed to escape before I could get to him. I wanted to give chase, get rid of a possible threat, but in the end I gave up. I was exhausted and Silas wasn't by any means weak. Even and had trouble handling him. While I didn't think for one second the two of us wouldn't be able to defeat him, it would still require energy. Energy that I simply didn't have. In the end, this is the best decision that we can make. And I really am too tired at the moment. It was taking about almost everything I had to keep myself from passing out on the spot. The only reason why I still held on for now was that we were still not out of danger just yet. The Crimson Sea was anything but friendly, and with the possibility of Silas appearing at any second, I had no choice but to remain vigilant. And so I did. Despite my drooping eyes and faltering mind, I remained awake, waiting for the ship as it slowly made its way back into the remnant south. The entire time the ship was quiet, without anyone making any sound. The only sound was the steady splash of water as the ship cut through the sea. Everyone remained silent, eyes scanning the surroundings with vigilance. Maybe it was the weight of the lives lost, or maybe it was caution, but even as we finally reached the remnant south, not a single word was spoken. It was only when we reached the outskirts of Virolith that, and finally approached me, her eyes squinting as she looked towards the distant city. We're here. Yes, we are. The city didn't look nearly as bad as I originally expected it to be. While the port was indeed broken and shattered in several areas, the city looked fine. Granted, the entire sequence of events occurred not very close to here, but the shocks and pressure alone from the monster were quite formidable. I wouldn't have been surprised if it had reached the city and even caused some serious damage to it, but looking at the massive dome that surrounded the entire city, it looked like I had severely underestimated the defensive capabilities of the city. In the end, the goddess also resides within the city. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the city is still standing. I was sure that she wouldn't allow the city to crumble with her present. Perhaps if not for her injuries, she would have probably been able to take care of the monster herself. We've docked. As Anne's words reached my ears again, I looked down to see the ship docked at the port, and without hesitation I jumped down onto the ground. Finally! Some ground. It almost felt like forever. In fact, after this, I really didn't want to go back to the sea for a very long time. What next? As Inez came next to me, staring towards the dome that stood not far from us, I pondered for a moment before touching my eye. We should get into the city and get some rest. We can figure everything else later. I'm sure this is what most of the people here want to do. Looking back and seeing how tired everyone looked, I figured that this was the best decision. And also appeared to be of the same opinion, and just like that we entered the remnant south and found an inn to stay. Clank! The moment I entered my room, the first thing I did was slump onto the bed before closing my eyes. Slowly clenching my fist, I thought about everything that had happened and pressed my lips together. Lazarus. He was nothing but another character that I had played. An act of some sort. And yet, he turned out to be the most significant character I played. And my last and final act. From this moment forward, it was going to be just me and me only. No more acting. There was no longer a need for me to do so. Chapter 683. It's been a while. 3. Chapter 683. It's been a while. 3. I didn't know how long I slept for. The only thing I knew was that I woke up feeling like shit. My entire body was sore all over, and my eye, it hurt like hell. It felt like a smoldering rock had been lodged where my eye used to be. The fact that I didn't wake up despite the pain was a miracle in itself. I guess I was that tired. Rubbing my face, I pushed myself out of bed and walked to the bathroom, where the mirror greeted me with a hollow stare. So not only did I feel like shit, I also looked like shit. It'll probably take a little bit for me to get used to this appearance again. No, but most importantly, squinting my eyes, I leaned my head closer towards the mirror and stared at my eye. Though subtle, the color of my right eye had changed. If I looked closely, I could see faint traces of white swirling within it. I felt a little creeped out by the sight. Thankfully, it wasn't extremely noticeable. However, it was clear that it was still growing. I felt that it wouldn't be long before my entire pupil turned white. The thought of having one white eye and one hazel eye made me feel uneasy. It would look strange. Maybe even a little creepy. Why am I even bothered with something like this? Letting out a quiet sigh, I turned away from the mirror and made my way back to the main room. It was modest in size, furnished with nothing more than a single bed and a desk. The curtains were drawn shut, casting the room in a dim gloom. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a small container filled with a thick black liquid. The moment I did, a primal, terrifying pressure swept through the room, pressing down on everything like an invisible weight. If not for the fact that I was quick to hide the pressure, I was afraid of attracting the attention of everyone within the city. Looking around, I bitterly smiled. I don't know if this is the best place to do this, but I don't think I can wait much longer. I planned on merging with the bone. Right here and right now. I felt that I had no choice but to do so. It was as if I were carrying some sort of bomb that was ready to explode at any given second. Perhaps I was being extremely paranoid, but I didn't want to delay the matter. I was also incredibly excited to do so. This was a primordial ranked bone. The power that it contained was extremely massive, and I couldn't wait to acquire a new skill. Just what sort of skill would I acquire from a primordial ranked bone? I salivated at the thought, and just as I was about to reach for the bone in order to merge with it, a figure appeared. Wait, HM? Stopping, I turned my head to see the figure of a certain owl. It was staring at the bone with deep apprehension. Now that I think about it, Almighty was also present back when Lazarus was undergoing all of the torture. However, it probably doesn't remember anything. The only one that remembered everything was Pebble. Unlike Almighty, Pebble was the only one that was still linked with my soul. It was the only one that had actually seen all of Lazarus's regressions. Wobbles was also unaware. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with the bone? Did I? No, it's not that. Almighty shook its head as its piercing eyes fell on the viscous liquid ahead. It looked to be closely analyzing it before eventually looking back at me. Its expression looked a little serious as it looked at me. The soul within the bone is extremely weak. Weak soul? Wait, did that mean? There's likely not going to be a will once you merge with the blood. It looks like the woman from before completely erased Exahurl's existence from the world, eliminating even its will. The faint soul that I'm feeling in the bone is extremely weak. Even if you do try to form a will, it will very likely not work. Perhaps in the future, but that is also not likely. Ah, so it was this. I didn't really know how to feel about this piece of news. Was I sad? Was I angry? I wasn't sure. In all honesty, I hadn't even thought about the will. All I thought about was fusing with the bone and gaining a new skill. Wait, a thought suddenly occurred to me. If there's no will, does that mean that merging with the bone will be a lot easier? I thought back to the time when I tried to merge with Pebble's bone. It took several months in order to battle its will before being able to fully merge with it. In this case, if the will was so weak that it was practically gone, wouldn't merging with it become a lot easier? That should be the case. Almighty's words were all that I needed to hear in order to confirm the thoughts, and my heart couldn't help but leap in excitement as I immediately squeezed my hand and channeled my mana into the bone. While it's a pity that there might be no will, the fact that it's easier to merge with it's good. It'll save me so much trouble. Vroom! A powerful pulse suddenly swept the entire room, knocking the curtains away and sending the chair onto the floor alongside the table. Thankfully, I had restricted all of the noise and as such wasn't worried about attracting unnecessary attention. But the pressure that was coming out of the bone was extremely powerful. It was so powerful that, for a moment, the restriction that I had set up almost shattered. Putting even more pressure on my hand, I circulated my mana even more rapidly and watched as the bone dug its way into my skin, crawling beneath its surface like some sort of worm before penetrating my muscles and entering my insides. The process didn't hurt much, but the visual stimulus was a little hard for me to take. Focus. Focus. I had to remind myself over and over again to remain focused. This next part was going to be integral for me as I was dealing with a primordial ranked bone. This was going to be the strongest bone that I had ever encountered, and while it no longer had a will, the power that was contained within the simple bone was still not something trivial. Gritting my teeth, I focused all of my attention on the bone that was streaming through my body. I was currently in no control of it. I was still unsure of which bone it would end up replacing. The only thing I could do at the moment was endure the pain that I was currently going through. Thankfully, the pain was something that I could bear. The only issue was the massive pressure that came alongside the bone. It made my chest feel incredibly heavy as my hands and body started to tremble uncontrollably. For a moment, I nearly lost concentration as a result of the situation. It was vital for me to remain focused. The moment I lost concentration, there was a high chance that the built-up pressure would suddenly explode alongside my body. The sight, it would certainly not be a pretty one. Focus, focus. Beads of sweat formed at the side of my forehead, dripping onto the floor before suddenly sizzling and fading into water vapor. Sizzle. Sizzle. More and more water vapor started to form around the room, causing the place to turn into some sort of sauna. Breathing started to become more difficult and my concentration nearly slipped a couple of times. However, I remained focused on my task. I was nearly done. I just had to focus for a little bit longer and everything was going to be okay. Gritting my teeth even harder than before, I felt the viscous bone finally latch onto a certain part of my body as both my eyes flared open. Now, I knew that this was the most vital step. Without wasting a single second, I channeled all my mana in the direction of the bone, forcing it to remain fixed on the spot. This time, I truly felt the pain. If I had been able to endure it before, this time was different. The pain was sharp and vivid, stealing the air from my lungs. My mouth opened instinctively, but no sound escaped. For a fleeting moment, my mind went completely blank. Every thought was wiped away by the sheer intensity of the pain. Thud. Even as I felt my body fall onto the floor, as it started to convulse, I found myself unable to think properly as I started to thrash around the floor, gripping onto anything that I could. Bang! Bang! I heard the sound of several things smashing and breaking, but it was all quite faint and muffled. I continued to struggle on the floor, gripping and reaching for anything that could help me. However, the more that I struggled, the more difficult things became for me. Darkness took over my vision shortly after that. By the time I woke up again, I found myself lying on the floor as I blankly stared at the ceiling above me. Ha! Ha! A sharp throb pulsed through my head as I fought to keep my eyes open. Strange dots danced across my vision and every movement felt disjointed. Out of sync. My head felt incredibly light, as if it might float away at any moment. Still forcing myself up, I blinked a couple of times and tried to regain my bearings. When I did, I finally saw the state of the room. It was bad to the point where it couldn't even be called a mess. The bed was broken in half. The window was shattered. The chair? Where the hell was the chair? All I saw were scattered pieces of wood. Thankfully, everything isn't very expensive. Otherwise, holding onto my head, I forced myself up and staggered towards the bathroom, the only place that was still intact within the room. Slowly moving towards the sink and placing both of my hands on it to rest, I raised my head up to stare at myself. It was in that moment that I saw it. My eyes. One red. One white. Ah! I opened my mouth, closing it shortly after as information started to flood into my mind, momentarily halting me in place. Eye of Existence. Chapter 684. It's been a while. 4. Chapter 684. It's been a while. 4. I assumed that without the system interface it would be difficult to understand how skills worked. But that wasn't the case. The moment I absorbed the bone, I instinctively knew both the name of the skill and what it could do. In fact, I could even argue it made things easier for me. Ha! Letting out another breath and staring at my own reflection, or to be more precise my eyes, I had a couple of mixed feelings. I was quite familiar with the skill. Having been subjected to it, I knew just how terrifying it was. However, at the same time, it wasn't exactly the same as when Exahurl used it on me. If I'm not mistaken, the skill should allow me to erase the existence of anyone whom I look at. Not just other people, but I can do it to myself too. For as long as my mana could keep up, I could erase my own existence and the existence of anyone that I targeted. This was all that I mainly knew about the skill. In order to figure out more, I needed to do a little bit of experimenting. I'm sure that given my current strength, the skill isn't as powerful as when Exahurl used it. For instance, Exahurl had the power to nearly wipe my existence from reality itself. I didn't know the full extent of the effect, but I was certain that within the mirror dimension at least I was slowly being forgotten piece by piece from everyone's memory. I wasn't capable of doing the same thing. But at the same time, I had an inkling that the reason why Exahurl was capable of pulling such a feat wasn't only because of its strength. There was certainly something else that granted it such power. If I had to take a guess, most likely I can affect a certain range. Maybe the entire city. I wasn't entirely sure. I would need to do a little testing in order to figure that out. The other things that I needed to figure out with this new skill were the mana consumption. I'm sure it will consume more mana depending on the number of people that I use the skill on and their general strength level. Even more testing was necessary in order for me to figure that out. However, in general, I understood the principles of the skill and the ways that I could utilize it. If used properly, this skill was extremely powerful. If I could erase my existence as I willed it alongside another person, then I could isolate myself alongside the person that I targeted, creating a lot of confusion. It could turn situations where I was ambushed by multiple enemies into unknown situations. I can even potentially make it so that they forget that they're targeting me. Against weaker opponents, I felt that this could work. The issue was the stronger ones. I didn't feel like I'd be able to keep the skill for long with them. However, it could certainly buy me some time and an opening. At the very least, a situation like back when I was attacked by the Church of Oracleus wouldn't occur. All in all, this was an extremely powerful skill befitting that of a primordial ranked bone. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes, opening them up again to see that both my pupils had returned to the same hazel color that I was used to. My face also started to change, slightly deforming from my original appearance. I quickly stopped that by channeling my mana. I couldn't go back to my original appearance just yet. On a different note, I feel that my mana has increased quite a bit after absorbing the bone. I shouldn't be too far off from the 7th tier. I felt like it wouldn't take long for me to reach that tier. Thinking about it, my current rate of progress was astounding. Normally from the 6th tier and up it would take several years for one to reach the next tier. As far as I was aware, it took Delia a couple of years in order for her to reach the 7th tier. While it's true that she started later than others because of how stubborn she was, it still doesn't change that I'm growing at a speed that is unheard of. I had some mixed feelings about this. I was happy to some extent, but at the same time I knew that it was still not fast enough. The current pace at which I was growing was still too slow for me. I previously thought that Sithris would be the end of it all, but that looks to be only half the truth. Outer beings. That was what the goddess called them. I still didn't know much about them nor what their goal was. However, if there was one thing that was clear to me, it was the fact that they were the main reason behind the mirror dimension. Whatever they wanted, it was certainly not going to be something that I liked. As far as I'm aware, Sithris might be the only one who can fight against them. I need to reach a point where I am at least on par with him in order to even have a chance at fighting against these outer beings. No, that's not enough. I needed to become stronger than Sithris. Develop my emotive magic further and become the 8th god. Me becoming the 8th god was the key to it all. Yes, I should focus on improving my emotive magic even more. I had just reached the 5th level, but there was still a lot for me to improve on. The 5th level was different from the previous levels. At this level, I could see the emotions of a person through different orbs. However, controlling the orbs mainly depended on one's level of said emotions. My strongest emotions were anger, fear, and sadness. I could manipulate the two emotions without any issues. The issue came with the other emotions. I needed to improve in that aspect. It was only once I mastered all of the basic emotions that I'd be able to truly tap into the next level. The 6th level. Indeed. Now that I had reached the 5th level of emotive magic, I was certain about it. There was a level that went beyond the 5th level. The only reason why nobody knew about it or even talked about it was that nobody had ever reached that level before. Only those who reached the 5th level of emotive magic would be able to sense it. But even then, it was faint. Extremely faint, and even I felt unsure of how to tap on it. However, if there was one thing that I knew, it was that it existed. That was all I needed. All I needed was that little knowledge in order to keep me driving forward. Still, that was easier said than done. The road was still a long one, and I understood that it wasn't going to come easily. All right. Closing my eyes once more and taking another breath in order to recover myself, I opened my eyes again and moved away from the sink, moving back to the room only for me to stop shortly after. About this. Scratching the back of my head, I pursed my lips. Should I make an as pay for this? The darkness completely swallowed the room. A single figure sat within the darkness, staring blankly at their hand. It was currently trembling. Following the darkness was a stifling silence. It enveloped the entire room, covering every inch of it as the figure remained still. But soon a change began to occur. The darkness pulsed, almost as if it were alive. Throb, throb. It pulsed more and more powerfully with each passing second, the surroundings shaking as a result. A terrifying pressure also began to emerge within the room. One that almost seemed to swallow everything in the surroundings. If not for the figure's careful control over their power, the power could have easily overtaken the entire surroundings, flattening everything. Throb. The throbbing persisted, growing even more powerful. The darkness pulsed once again, but this time, as though the darkness was a veil, it started to stretch weirdly. And then, throb. With a sudden powerful throb, the darkness surged outward before collapsing in on itself, stripping the room bare and revealing a simple space: a bed, a desk, a chair, and a wardrobe. Nothing extravagant. Yet the figure seated at the center stood in stark contrast to the plainness around her. Her black hair swayed gently in the still air, and her deep obsidian eyes seemed to embody the darkness itself. Yet within that shadowed presence was an undeniable beauty. One that no amount of darkness could conceal. A day had passed since the fight with the gigantic monster. Despite Delilah's best attempts at trying to suppress the pain that came after the event, she found herself unable to, as some sort of strange and foreign power dug deeply into her body, latching onto her blood and causing it to stir. Delilah spent the entire day trying to figure out what the strange power was. At first she thought it was the monster's blood. However, Delilah quickly realized that it wasn't the case, as whatever had entered her body was extremely strong and seemed to have a will of its own. Normally one would be worried about having a foreign substance enter their body. However, for some strange reason, Delilah felt that the substance was somehow connected to her. Rather than trying to harm her, it almost felt as though it was trying to help her. She felt all the injuries that she had incurred, be it in the fight and in the past, slowly start to heal alongside her body. At the same time, she also started to feel her heart starting to boil, almost as if it was growing excited. What could it be? The situation left Delilah completely confused. She wanted to dig deeply into her body to figure out the origin of the weird substance and why it was resonating so much with her. But that was easier said than done. And most importantly, lowering her head to stare at her trembling hand again, Delilah pursed her lips. She could feel it. The wall that she had been struggling to break for the past years. It was finally starting to show cracks. She was one step closer to reaching the next tier. The Zenith. Chapter 685. It's been a while. 5. Chapter 685. It's been a while. 5. What? A loud shout cut through the surroundings. You want me to pay for your mess? This is bullshit. I don't have the money. No, more importantly, what in the world did you do to reduce your room into this mess? Coming up into Lazarus's room to check up on him, the last thing, and as expected, was the sight that greeted him. What could he even call the sight that greeted him? A mess? A disaster? It looked like a storm had come. There was practically nothing left of the room. The windows were shattered, all sorts of splinters of wood littered the floor, presumably pieces of what once used to be the furniture and the floor. The walls were dented, and the bed. Where the hell was the bed? Glaring at Lazarus, who was tracing his finger across the wall with a stoic expression and as felt like beating him up. Of course he stopped himself when he recalled just how powerful Lazarus was. Oh wow! A soft voice echoed shortly after as Anne entered the room, whistling to herself as she saw the mess. Brushing her curly hair back, she placed her hand on her cheek. I did hear you say that this place was a mess, but can this thing even be called a mess? I'd say total annihilation would be a more fitting term. Despite seeing the mess, Anne didn't seem to share the same frustration as Inez. In fact, she found the situation to be somewhat amusing. Then again, it wasn't like Lazarus had asked her to pay. Wait, now that I think about it, I can have her pay for the place. Inez hastily opened his mouth but quickly felt a hand press against it, stopping whatever word was about to come out. I'm not paying. He didn't even say anything. I don't need to read your mind to know what you're thinking. Your face tells me all that I need to know. Anaz stopped struggling from that moment. His shoulders slumped in the process. Both Lazarus and her were richer than him. Why was he made to be the one paying for Lazarus's mess? It wasn't cheap either. This place was made specifically to withstand the harsh environments of the mirror dimension. The price of the repairs was enough to make Anaz want to throw himself out the window. On another note, what in the world did you do to create a mess like this? Anaz's ears perked up the moment he heard An's words. He was also curious to know the answer. Just what in the world did the merchant do in order to turn the room like this? Oh, that. Pulling his hand away from the wall, Lazarus turned his attention towards them. Not really a secret. I just absorbed Exahurl's bone. Oh, I see. Azan nodded and pulled her hand away from her cheek, and reached his hand forward to grab her hand to cover his mouth. Huh? You sick perv. And suddenly blinked. As though the clogs in her head had suddenly been oiled, she blinked a couple of times before her eyes suddenly widened. You, This time it was Anaz who covered her mouth as she nearly shouted at the top of her lungs. Shoo! She proceeded to glare at him but stopped when she realized how serious the situation was as she pulled her hand away from his mouth. Similarly pulling his hand away, the two stood in silence for a brief moment before Anaz opened his mouth again, looking at Lazarus as though he were some sort of monster. You managed to get Exahurl's bone? How did you? I clearly remember that. That's not important. He probably won't answer even if we ask. And cut Anaz off, staring at Lazarus intently. What skill did you learn? This was the thing that Anne was most curious about. What sort of skill did a primordial ranked bone give? Surely it wasn't going to be anything bad, right? Both Anaz and Anne looked at Lazarus with anticipation. Feeling their gazes, Lazarus smiled before staring in Anaz's direction. The moment he did his left eye suddenly changed color and the world froze for a split second. By the time the world returned to normal, both Anaz and Anne blinked their eyes. Huh? Did you do something? I don't. However, a few seconds later both of their expressions changed as they looked at each other. Anne's expression turned extremely serious as she looked at Anaz. The same was true for Anaz, who turned to look at Julian. Shit. We got an intrud. Yuk. Bang. Anaz was never able to finish his sentence before he was suddenly thrown into the wall, his back crashing against it as his face turned pale and he spat out saliva. Thud. Sliding onto the ground, and was about to follow up when she stopped and her expression changed. Oh shit. Anaz groaned while he slowly raised his head to look at Lazarus. Memories started to surface in his mind as the two of them looked towards Lazarus, whose expression was rather pale. His eyes were back to their usual color and his expression eased shortly after. Covering his left eye, which was currently burning intensely, he began to mumble to himself, "In the end, I wasn't able to last long. It seems that trying to pull this on a tire 8 is still too much for me. However, it still works, so." Neither Anaz nor Anne was stupid. The two instantly understood the situation as they looked at one another. He erased our existence. He did that thing. Having lived through this exact scenario before, the two of them immediately understood what Lazarus had just done, and their mouths fell open, unable to mask their shock. The skill. It was extremely overpowered. Looking around, Lazarus sat down on the floor. The mana consumption of the skill was far higher than he had previously expected. But nonetheless, he still found the results to be good. While he couldn't affect the mind of a high-tiered user for long, it was still long enough for him to gain an advantage. But he was still far from satisfied. There were still a couple of things that he wanted to test out. Raising his head to look at the still shocked Anaz, and Lazarus forced a smile as his eyes changed color once more. At the same time, he looked at Anaz with pity. Sorry in advance. Get your bone. Buy a bone. Our bones are of the highest quality. Get your bone. We offer our bones at a lower price than most other bones. Anaz screamed at the top of his lungs, waving a couple of bones in the air. As he screamed, people would turn to look in our direction as they pointed at us. Or more specifically, Anaz, whose face was currently swollen. I looked at him with pity before lowering my head and grabbing a handful for myself. Bones. Get your bones. This was the price of poverty. In order to pay for the room that I had broken, we had no other choice but to sell bones. At first I thought that Anaz would have some money to help, but he was dirt poor. The same was for Anne, who had to pay for her crew and all the damages that her ship sustained. In fact, she was probably the poorest out of all of us. Get your bones. That was also why she was probably the loudest of the three of us. This is of the highest quality. As I waved another bone in the air, I suddenly felt a tug over my shoulder, and when I looked to my right, I saw Anaz looking at me with a suspicious look. Wait, now that I think about it, do you really have no money? Eh? What was he saying? Of course I didn't have money. Why else would I be doing this? Anaz's eyes narrowed. From what I remember, you sold quite a lot of goods, no? Back when you just opened the gray chamber of commerce. Ha! Memories started to resurface in my mind. Thinking about it, that did indeed happen. If I'm not wrong, you even sold quite a lot of goods to Silas? There was quite a large deposit involved, was it not? He also didn't take the stuff as far as I remember. My eyes started to widen as I felt and suddenly stop, her head slowly turning towards me as I suddenly broke into a cold sweat. I certainly did remember this, yes. I cleared my throat, moving my head a little bit further away from Anaz, who was moving his head dangerously close to me. It's rather dry here, don't you think? I licked my lips. At the same time, I placed the bones in my hand on the table. Dry? Do you think it's dry? And not much different than how it usually is. These two. I licked my lips once again, bringing my consciousness into my ring, where I saw several large bags filled with coins. Looking at it, there was probably quite a lot. I brought my consciousness back and looked at the two of them. Holding on to my chest, my lips started to quiver. Don't bring up the matter of the money. Just thinking about it hurts me. Ha! Both Anaz and looked taken aback. I bit my lips, mumbling sadness over and over again as a certain pain started to invade my chest, causing something to streak down the side of my face. During my fight against Xahurl, practically lost everything. I did have the money before, but gone. Everything is gone. Clutching my shirt, I had to take a moment to sit down. The pain was starting to get to me. I was so immersed in my character that I even started to believe my own story. Oh, my money. I covered my face with both hands, peeking through the gaps just to see Anaz and looking somewhat taken aback and sorry. Seeing them like that, I did feel a little sorry. Unlike Lazarus, I was an award-winning actor. He might not be able to fool them, but me? Any day. If only I didn't keck. We all paused for a moment. Did you just laugh? He did, didn't he? I did, didn't I? Feeling my heart slowly sink, I was about to put up an even grander act when all of a sudden a voice echoed from behind. Is everything all right? I paused the moment I heard the voice. It was a voice I was all too familiar with. One that I had spent a major part of my life in this world with, and one belonging to a man who called himself my knight. I saw that you were selling bones. If now is not a good time, then, Leon. He was right behind me. Chapter 686. It's been a while, 6. A few moments prior. Where do you think the Chancellor is? I can't wait to get out of this place already. How long do we have to remain here? I'm tired. It's hot. In the wake of the battle with the colossal beast and the chaos that followed, the cadets found themselves stranded in the remnant south. Besides the port, the city didn't suffer much damage. Most of the buildings remained intact, and aside from the occasional murmur about what had happened, life went on as usual. The city had returned to the same bustling rhythm it had before the events unfolded. Leon, alongside most of the cadets, had left their own place in order to look around. They were currently all waiting for the Chancellor to come back. She was the only one who could bring them out of this place. Without her, it'd be impossible for them to find their way back. Walking ahead, Evelyn turned around and said, "There's no point in complaining. The Chancellor most likely suffered some injuries from the fight. She's probably taking some time to recover." Injuries? Aoife raised her brow. Do you really think the Chancellor suffered some injuries? She looked okay to me. I mean, you felt the aftermath of the fight. The Chancellor might be really strong, but there's no way that she came out unharmed from that fight. Probably wasn't anything major, but it might still take some time. Aoife lowered her head and contemplated Evelyn's words. To some extent, her words made sense. Looking up and fixing her gaze on the boring Kira, she prepared to speak when Kira raised her hand to stop her. Evelyn is most likely right. Oh? A question mark appeared over Aoife's head. Why did she stop her from speaking? Aoife got her answer not long after. Your voice is not pleasing to the ear. I'd rather you keep quiet. Oh. Wait, wasn't Kira supposed to be nice? Why, there's a limit to how nice I can be. Oh. Oh? The hell? In any case, we should probably take this chance to explore the city. Since we might have to go back to the Empire soon, why not explore the city and buy some items that you can only find here? Like? As Aoife asked, Kira pointed towards the distance where merchants lined up. Get your bones. We provide the best bones. Terra-ranked bones included. Bones. Aoife's eyes widened with realization as she looked around her to see several cadets salivating while staring in the distance. Indeed, bones were quite hard to find in the Empire. While she never had a shortage of bones due to her family providing her with any bone that she wanted, the same couldn't be said for the others. This place. It was without a doubt a gold mine for the cadets here. You make a good point. Aoife nodded quietly, turning her attention towards the right where she saw a pensive-looking figure. He was standing with his head lowered, deep in contemplation. Was something up? Aoife raised her brow and approached Leon, brushing her red hair behind her ear. Is everything good? HM? Hearing Aoife's voice, Leon turned his head. Spotting Aoife, he opened his mouth to say something but decided against it and just simply nodded while mumbling, "I'm fine." "Are you?" Leon's face said otherwise. He looked anything but fine. However, Aoife didn't press him. She knew that pressing would only annoy him. In the end, she pointed towards the stall in the distance. "Why don't you consider buying some bones? As far as I know, you still have quite a few slots that you can fill." HM. Turning his head to stare at the distant stalls, Leon scratched his cheek as his eyes narrowed a little. Looking at the numerous bones that were put on display and feeling the aura of a few, he felt somewhat tempted. He indeed was lacking in bones. It wasn't like he lacked the money to purchase them, but the prices in the Empire were really too absurd. Buying one bone needed deep and careful consideration. It wasn't like he could buy as many as he wished after all. However, staring at the prices of the bones here, Leon realized that most of the bones here were almost 4 to 5 times cheaper than in the Empire. This was practically a steal, and after musing for a few more moments, he decided to head for one of the stalls. While his thoughts had been preoccupied with Julian and how to find him, he at least knew that he was safe. He could spare some time looking for some bones. "Bones. We offer the lowest prices. Get your bone." Stalls lined both sides of the long cobblestone street with people meandering from one to the next. Some merchants drew steady crowds, their goods in high demand, while others stood idly by waiting as fewer customers came their way. One quick look at Leon was able to understand why. Hellfish Terra ranked bone. 900,000 soles. Hellfish Terra ranked bone. 770,000 soles. Some stores simply sold at a cheaper price than others. Wow, that's a massive difference. The cadets couldn't help but marvel at the sight, feeling tempted to purchase the bones straight away. If they could bring some back. It's good and all, but can we even afford them? At Aoife's sudden question, the faces of a few changed. Evelyn patted her pockets, taking out a sack and peeking at the gap, her face changing slightly as she looked at the others. "I might need to start selling a few things before I can afford it." "Same. Me too." Everyone quickly realized the problem that they were currently facing. While the bones were indeed a lot cheaper than in the Empire, the currency here was different. None of them had the amount required by the merchants in order to purchase the bones. "Do you think we can trade? Maybe?" Looking at them, Leon's eyes narrowed slightly. He was a bit different from them. He actually did have the money to buy at least one bone. A Terra ranked one. However, was this what he really wanted? "Considering how I haven't filled all my bones yet, a Terra ranked might be good. But what about a Destroyer rank?" Leon felt that absorbing a Terra ranked bone was a bit of a waste when he could consume a Destroyer ranked one. However, at the same time, he also knew that the rank wasn't exactly the most crucial thing when selecting a bone. The most important thing was the skill that came with the bone. An infant-ranked bone could very well provide him with a skill that was far more useful than a Destroyer-ranked one. But in terms of raw power, the Destroyer-ranked one was without a doubt going to be a lot better. It was a tough decision. One that left Leon stumped. Then again, finding a Destroyer-ranked bone isn't going to be easy. It'll also probably cost a lot. There's no point in getting too greedy. Leon shook his head, ready to give up on his search, when suddenly a voice echoed through the air. "Get your bones. Get your bones from us. We from the Grey Chamber provide the lowest prices. You won't be disappointed. We also offer Destroyer-ranked bones. Come before they're gone." Leon's head snapped toward the voice, though it was quickly swallowed by the chatter of merchants all around. A Destroyer-ranked bone? He wasn't the only one who heard the voice, as Aoife, Kira, Kalian, Kaya, and Evelyn also heard it. Immediately their interest was piqued as they all turned to look at each other before moving towards the distant stall where a fairly young man appeared. He appeared rather skinny, with his strength hovering around the 4th to 5th tier. He wasn't exactly strong, but turning their attention towards the woman standing next to him, they all grew incredibly serious. While they weren't sure of her strength, just one look at her was enough to make them all extremely apprehensive. "She's strong." Though a wave of apprehension passed over them, it was tempered by a sense of relief. If it were her, they feared being scammed less. She clearly had the strength to gather Destroyer-ranked bones. Leon and the others prepared to approach the stall. However, right as they did so, they were suddenly startled to see her frowning alongside the skinny vendor as they both looked towards a man who was covering his face with both hands, his body trembling. "What's going on?" He looked to be crying. Was everything all right? No, but most importantly, why does he feel familiar? Leon's lips pressed together. For whatever reason, staring at the distant merchant, Leon felt a sense of familiarity coming from him, and without knowing, he started moving on his own, reaching the stall as he suddenly asked, "I saw that you were selling bones. If now is not a good time, then..." The moment he spoke, the merchant suddenly seemed to freeze, while the other two turned their heads in his direction, both sporting a smile. We have a customer. Are you looking for a bone?" For some reason, the two of them looked rather enthusiastic as they looked at him. When Leon turned his attention towards the other merchant, his brow rose as the merchant turned his back against him and squatted down towards a box filled with bones, picking one slowly before blowing on it. Anaz and An both looked at the merchant and just barely managed to keep their smiles from twitching. The hell was he doing? No, now wasn't the time. He quickly forced a smile. We offer all sorts of bones. From infant to destroyer. You can tell us what sort of requirement you need and we can work to find the bone that best suits your needs. As Anaz spoke, he fixed his gaze on the man before him. Short black hair framed a face marked by striking gray eyes. He wasn't handsome nor was he ugly. He was simply average. Yet a single glance revealed undeniable strength beneath the ordinary exterior. And also saw this, which was why the two of them were enthusiastic. If he were strong, it meant that he had money. They needed money. Not only that, but looking behind the man, they also saw several other people all looking around in wonder. They didn't seem to lose out to the man in front of them, and their eyes glinted. However, what they weren't aware of was the fact that Leon continued to keep his gaze on the strange man. No matter how I look at it, he feels familiar. But looking at his waist and seeing a sword, Leon's brows furrowed. He slowly started to recall some pieces of information he had heard in the past, and his eyes narrowed even further. Couldn't be right? Customer? While his instincts currently didn't work, Leon felt the resemblance become clearer and clearer as the seconds passed. Couldn't be him, right? His body shook for a brief moment. Customer? But if it was him, why didn't he turn around? Surely he recognized him. Unless... He's ignoring me? But why would he do that? No, taking into consideration how he had left without a word, Leon was sure that he had his own reasons. In that sense, would calling out for him now not be something he'd wish for? Leon fell into deep contemplation. Customer. Huh. But that contemplation only lasted a few seconds before he was suddenly jolted by a loud voice as his head flicked towards the merchants, who were both looking at him with worried expressions. Is everything okay? Have you found the bone that you wish? They both looked at him with a look of anticipation, waiting for him to give his requirements. And soon Leon's mouth opened. But, what do you call a fly without wings? Huh? Both Anaz and An froze, their minds growing blank. And just before they could process the situation, Leon continued. A walk. Lines formed across the faces of everyone present, including Leon, whose face seemed to turn as stoic as a rock. Chapter 687. It's been a while. 7. Chapter 687. It's been a while. 7. Amid the general noise of merchants and bargaining customers, a distinct silence hung over one particular stall. As if everyone was possessed, they all wore the same stoic faces, gazes directed towards a certain individual whose face looked even more deadpan. Right now, Leon was dying inside. His stomach was twisting and he was just one moment away from puking. However, he held the disgust in as he looked towards his target. With his back turned towards him, Leon wasn't able to see his face. But that didn't matter to him. If it were the same guy that he knew, then it wouldn't matter. But nothing. He remained focused on the task at hand. Did he assume wrongly? Question marks appeared on Leon's head. What the fuck was that? The silence surrounding them was finally broken by a sharp voice, drawing every eye to the speaker, who fixed Leon with a look that radiated pure disgust. Just as she was about to follow up with her words, a voice chimed in. Wait. Did boring Kira just swear? Am I hearing things? She did. Several nods followed after everyone looking at Kira with both surprise and relief. Seeing Kira not swear felt odd to them. This felt a lot better to them. The frown on Kira's face deepened when she heard their words, and just as she opened her mouth, she closed it as her fists clenched tightly. Aoife quickly moved next to Evelyn as she mumbled. She's going to slap me, isn't she? I can feel it. She's really about to slap me. She is. Evelyn nodded by the side, adding fuel to the fire. The two were clearly teasing Kira, and they were doing a very good job at it, as Kira was starting to lose control of herself. However, taking several deep breaths, she managed to calm herself down as she lowered her fist and closed her eyes. Calm. I need to remain calm. She had been doing such a good job as of late to be more mature and not get triggered easily. Tisk. Tisk. Her brow twitched when she heard the sound of tongues clicking. However, she remained firm and resolute. Staring at the sight, Leon felt that this scene was a lot more in line with how things used to be in the past. For some reason, it made him feel a little more relaxed as he turned his attention back towards the merchant. His doubts only rose when he saw him blow on another bone. Customer? Getting called again, Leon turned towards the woman merchant as she forced a smile. Did you find anything that you wish to buy? Feel free to tell us if you found anything. Anaz forced a smile as he stood next to her. He had been somewhat taken aback by the joke, but it was just a joke. It was weird, but nothing bad. He might not be right in the head, but so long as he pays, it doesn't matter. The joke was quite frankly terrible too. He couldn't think of one person who would even find that remotely funny. Oh yes. Looking at the merchants with an apologetic look, Leon shifted his attention towards the manual in front of him as he scrolled through it before picking a random terror-ranked bone. Honestly, he wasn't even paying attention to the bone he was picking. He was more preoccupied with other things. "I'd like to see this one, please." "This one?" Inez looked at the bone that Leon picked and raised his brow. "Crown whale. I see. Not a bad choice." Nodding, Inez shifted his gaze to Lazarus, who raised his hand to reveal a black bone. A powerful pressure radiated from it, sweeping through the surroundings. "Thanks." Nodding his head, Inez reached for the bone. However, right as he did, Leon opened his mouth again. Why did the whale blush? Oh! The faces of several people changed at once as they all snapped their heads in Leon's direction. It saw the ocean's bottom. "I once read a book about glue. I couldn't put it down." The silence that had once filled the surroundings once again returned. This time it was even more pronounced than before as the faces of everyone present turned stoic, their eyes fixed on Leon, who looked just as stoic. But upon closer look one would see that there was no light in his eyes. He had the face of someone who had given up on their pride and shame. How did the barber win the race? He knew a shortcut. By now it wasn't just the cadets and Anne and Inez who were quiet. As if the other customers and merchants had heard Leon's words, they too stopped, their faces turning stoic as they all looked at Leon, who looked completely unfazed, his sense of shame thrown towards the furthest place possible. The entire time he said the jokes, he kept his gaze fixed on the merchant, who was continuously moving the bones, seemingly unbothered by them. Leon's frown deepened when he saw no reaction from him, and it was also then that he was suddenly reminded of something. Is my delivery not good? Indeed, that could be the problem. It was just unfortunate that everyone heard his words as Inez's face turned extremely strange. Delivery? What delivery? The jokes were horrible to begin with. What would the delivery do? Inez felt like crying. Why did it seem like he was only meeting strange people lately? First it was the merchant. Then it was the pirate woman. And now? This random stranger was fixated on jokes. As if anyone would kook. Inez paused for a moment, his eyes blinking slowly as he turned his attention behind him, where he saw Lazarus diligently working on cleaning up the bones in front of him. His brows furrowed even more. I could have sworn that I heard the sound coming from here. Am I overthinking? Yes, that might be the case. Inez was prepared to turn around when Leon opened his mouth again. What do you call it when a cow grows facial hair? Leon's eyes narrowed as he looked at his target. Then, following a brief moment of silence, he said, "A moustache." The silence felt loud. But within the silence Leon heard another sound. Yuk! Yuk! The faces of many changed. Leon's face started to change as his eyes narrowed further and he started to whisper. I've been learning a lot of jokes as of late. A certain someone did give me a book filled with such jokes in the past. Leon's face looked anything but normal. Taking a look at him, Inez was taken aback. He looked like someone who had been wronged by the world as he fixed his gaze on Lazarus. Wait, Lazarus? Turning around, Inez was shocked to see Lazarus's body trembling. I have also improved massively on my delivery. I don't think there's anyone who is as good as me now. Lazarus's body trembled further and Inez's expression turned even stranger. No way. It was just as things were about to escalate when Leon pressed his hand against the table and pointed towards a certain bone. I'll take this. Eh? What? Leon's sudden action caught everyone off guard. Was he schizophrenic? What was up with him today? While everyone was wondering the same thing, Inez was quick to move, taking out the bone that Leon requested and handing it to him as Leon handed him a large sack of coins. Here. It was a pleasure dealing with you. And with that, Leon smiled and turned around, fiddling with the bone in his hand as he moved past the stupefied cadets. They all seemed to have a lot of things to say, but Leon just smiled at them. He had gotten what he wanted. He was also able to confirm what he wanted. That was all that Leon planned on doing. He had no plans on exposing Julian. Since he's keeping his identity a secret, it must be because he has to. I see no reason to expose him. All Leon wanted to do was confirm that he was alive and well. This was his duty as his knight. Now that he was certain, he could feel a lot more at ease. Hey, what is up with you? Did you hit your head or something? Ignoring everyone else as he walked away, Leon silently smiled. It's been a while. He definitely figured something out. Despite my best attempts, I had blown my cover. This bastard. His delivery wasn't even good. At the very least, not as good as mine. The issue lay in the fact that his jokes were good. I had made a mistake in giving him the book back then. Thankfully, Leon didn't pursue the matter any longer and just left. He probably understood that I wasn't in a position to reveal my identity. Well, I wasn't so sure anymore. I knew that Cithras was most likely about to figure out the situation and Leon was still the owner of the chalice. Realistically speaking, there was no longer a need for me to hide the fact that I was alive. It was just that I wasn't quite ready yet. At least not ready to face her just yet. Honestly, I was scared. I knew that she knew that I was alive. I had purposely left some clues in order to get her to come. The idea was that she could help me in case I lost myself in Lazarus, but that thankfully didn't happen. In the end, she still did end up helping me by getting Hurl. I knew that things would eventually end up at this point. But how in the world is she going to react? All sorts of thoughts swirled in my mind at that moment as I struggled to think properly. But soon my thoughts were broken by a certain voice. We've struck it quite rich. It was Anaz. He was currently waving the money pouch. Looking at him, I forced a smile. Nice. With this, we will be able to pay off the damage. Yeah, it's way more than enough. Anaz looked genuinely happy. But at the smile wiped away from his face as he turned in the direction of where Leon had been. That said, I've never encountered anyone as weird as that guy. What was up with him and his weird joke? Yeah, and nodded alongside him. But, well, they were good jokes. Quite good in fact. Enough to make me envious. Anaz's and Anne's bodies froze, their faces turning stoic at the same time. For a moment I almost thought I saw lines tracing down the sides of their faces. Almost like half of their faces were covered by a shadow. Strange. The jokes were good though. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions. Just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.